Echoing Green Global Fellowship, making JPP the first Pakistani organization to be recognized in the fellowship's history. Sara studied history at Smith College and completed a law degree from Oxford in 2006. So without further ado, I would like to invite Sara Bilal to the dais to please offer her opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum, distinguished guests. I'm so sorry you had to endure my bio. I think that was some kind of JPP failure over there. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody, the honorable justices that are present here, our colleagues from civil society, and journalists, and everybody here. I'm very, very grateful that everybody took time out today and out of their busy schedules to come and help us celebrate the launch of our book, Serving Time, Pakistan's Prisons Through the Ages. So just a few words about the book and how we thought about it. As practitioners in this field, we often observe that the discussion around prison reform in Pakistan usually centers around our failure to revise colonial-era laws and also our inability to pass modern laws. But we found that most of these conversations fail to consider the dynamics of how these two approaches converge to give birth to a largely dysfunctional system that is mostly resistant to reform. We also believe that there is a lack of understanding around how narratives of statehood, securitization, and criminal identity influences practices of arrest and imprisonment in each province. This book that we're launching today aims to fill that gap and also to provide a historically contextual framework with which we can approach penal reform in Pakistan. And, you know, they mentioned that my first degree was a history degree, which I must say it's still my favorite degree. This book is an effort to make an argument about how we should be looking at our provincial prison systems and their evolution within the context of the history of each province. And by focusing on the historical origins and the evolution of our prison systems in each province, this book aims to broaden the scope of what it means to examine prison conditions and how we call for reform. And the centerpiece of this book are the oral narrations from several former under trial and convicted prisoners across the 4 provinces. Their stories provide invaluable insight into how different aspects of prison regulation, procedures, and access to facilities are experienced and applied in a punitive method. By narrating these stories, we have tried to maintain fairness, highlighting both sides of the issue. You will see tales of desperation, but also glimmers of hope. And also you see accounts of not just prisoners, but you also hear directly from prison officials in all 4 provinces. What we have seen as a consistent theme that emerged while we were writing this book is that prison officials and prisons, as they currently stand, are not able to achieve the objectives of imprisonment because there's not much dignity. There's a lot of trauma, there's corruption, there's abuse, and there's also attempts to curb dissent. But we hope that this book is a beginning to start a conversation around penal reform within our provincial context and with our historical sociological context. Along with the book, we have launched an interactive website because in this day and age, it doesn't matter if you write a book, it only matters if you're there on the web. And it's an interactive website that brings the findings of the book alive. So you can hear audio narrations of the prisoners, of the prison officials. You can look at all the historical maps and the stories. So it's a different experience if you don't like reading a whole book. And here we can demonstrate it. These are touch screens. So when it's tea time, please have a go and explore the websites. These are both here for you to use. I would just like to finish by saying that writing this book has obviously been a labor of love. And I'd like to thank the author, Radha Shah, who's going to be joining us on Zoom, and also the entire JPP team. But I want to dedicate this book to the investigation team, the investigators at JPP. You know, we're a team of lawyers and policy people and communications people, but the heart and soul of what we do is carried out by the investigators. They have traversed the entire country to meet our clients every week in prison. They've borne witness to final meetings between death row defendants and their children. They have held the hands of the inconsolable families of those who've been executed. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do and for the burden that you bear for all of us. And I salute your strength, but most of all, I salute your infinite compassion for the most vulnerable and the despised amongst us. And I will end with saying that, in conclusion, I think we have to radically reimagine prisons in order for us to break from our past. And it has to be a collaborative effort, not only with civil society and the prisons home department or the Punjab government, but it has to be one that involves the judiciary as well and the legal community. And you know, finally, I'd like to say, I think it is time, with the end of the imperial experiment, I guess, with the passing of the Queen, perhaps it's time that Punjab at least can finally pass new Punjab prison rules. You know, the empire is finished, and maybe we can take this as a new beginning for us to redraft our rules according to our own principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for starting us off. Moving swiftly onwards, we have our keynote speaker, Honorable Mr. Justice Asif Saeed Khosa. I'd like to introduce him before calling him up on stage. Justice Khosa was sworn in as the 26th Chief Justice of Pakistan in January 2019. On February 18, 2010, his lordship was elevated to the position of a Supreme Court judge, and over a period of more than 19 years, he has decided about 55,000 cases, including several high-profile ones. His lordship was also part of 2 high-profile blasphemy-related cases and has tremendous contributions towards the independence of the judiciary, human rights, ethics, access to justice, judicial education, management, court administration, legal reform, consensus building, and cooperation. He has written multiple books during his career and is also a founding member of the SARC Law and was elected member of the board of directors of the Commonwealth Judicial Education Institute in Halifax, Canada. His lordship secured his LLM degree from the University of Cambridge in 1978 with a specialization in public international law. He was called to the bar in July 1979 at the Honourable Society of Lincoln's in London and was conferred the degree of Archer Barrister. His lordship was enrolled as an advocate of the Lahore High Court on November 1979 and later as an advocate of the Supreme Court of Pakistan in September 1985. As an advocate, he handled thousands of cases of constitutional, criminal, civil, service, revenue, and election laws in the superior courts of Pakistan. Without further ado, sir, if you could please.
Before I say anything else, I would just remind the organizers that they have to be careful. There are so many microphones on this desk that there's no place for me to put my file on. So next time, no, it's okay, but next time I think it should be taken care of. Sarah Bilal and her team, the organizers of this meeting, this event, this book launch, the Honorable former Chief Justice of Lahore High Court, Muhammad Qasim Khan Sahib, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To start with, I congratulate the Justice Project Pakistan on coming out with this wonderful book, Serving Time, Pakistan Prisons Through the Ages, written by Radha Shah. I don't identify her. If she can just raise her hand. Is she? Okay. And under the auspices of the Justice Project Pakistan. It is not a very voluminous book, so when a copy was sent to me, I hurriedly went through it because this prison system, the prisoners, and the criminal justice system as a whole is very close to my heart. So I went through the whole of it, and I found that it's a comprehensive study of laws and practices regarding prisons in this part of the world. It also encapsulates the pre- and post-independence approaches vis-à-vis prisons and prisoners. The book is full of insights and should be included in the list of compulsory reading in every law school of the country. The lawyers and judges in the country will also do well by reading this book for clarity of understanding of the relevant issues involved in our criminal justice system. So please accept my compliments on bringing out such a wonderful piece of research. I was told that I was to speak today, so I have prepared something, and the caption is Plight of Imprisoned Offenders, a Compassionate Perspective. There may be many theories as to what is to be achieved by imprisonment of an offender. Some hold that the purpose is punishment and retribution, while others maintain that it is reformation and rehabilitation which is the objective. I, however, understand that the answer lies somewhere in between. That is, to make the offender realize that he had done something wrong and that he is to improve his conduct and to conform to the norms of the society that he lives in. It is, however, of critical importance to appreciate that an imprisoned offender is also as much a citizen of the state as all of us, and above all, he is also a human being, just like us, and is thus entitled to all the constitutional, legal, and human rights applicable to him. While dealing with such an imprisoned offender, it must always be kept in view that the thick and high walls of a prison are not thick or high enough to keep the constitutional, legal, and human rights of the citizens confined therein out, and that the constitutional, legal, and human rights available to the generality of the citizenry, barring a few exceptions, do not stop being effective or operational inside the confines of a prison. I believe that denial of his rights to an imprisoned offender or treating him inhumanely dehumanizes him, which neither serves retribution nor achieves reformation. It is in this context that today I want to dilate upon some aspects which demand compassion vis-à-vis plight of the imprisoned offenders. The first point, hate crime and not the criminal. In my capacity as a judge of the Lahore High Court, I had an occasion to deal with the plight of prisoners who had served out their substantive sentences of imprisonment for the offenses committed by them, but were detained in prisons for an indefinite period merely because they had no financial capacity to pay the fines, diyat, arsh, or daman ordered to be paid by them to the state, the heirs of the victim in case of murder, or the victims themselves in cases of hurt. The case was Abid Hussain and another versus Chairman Baitul Pakistan, Baitul Mal, and others. This is PLD 2002 Lahore 482. And the opening part of my judgment handed down in that case read as follows, and I'm very proud of this passage. The quote starts, and the judgment also starts with these words: putting a human being, the best of Almighty Allah's creations, in an iron cage for the rest of his life for no other reason than his abject poverty is an idea abhorrent to the dignity bestowed upon him by the Creator. And I've quoted from the Holy Quran, where God Almighty says, Karramna Bani Adam, means I conferred dignity on the children of Adam. When the Holy Quran enjoins upon the believers to spend on prisoners, slaves, and those in debt, and for saving their necks and for lessening of their burdens, it sends an unmistakable message that what is to be hated is crime and not the criminal, and the unfortunate predicament of such a human being is to be visited with compassion and mercy wherever and however possible. It is manifestly in this backdrop that the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan ensures it as a fundamental right guaranteed by Article 14 thereof, that the dignity of man is inviolable. In the case of In re Suo Motu constitutional petition, which is reported as 1994 SCMR 1028, and incidentally, it was a case that somebody was to be publicly hanged. And the Amnesty International sent a telegram to the then Chief Justice of Pakistan, Justice Naseem Hasan Shah, who was my father-in-law. I was a young lawyer at that time, and my father-in-law said that here's the telegram. We were having a cup of tea at home. And he said, I've received a telegram. Can I do something? And I was young from the bar and full of ideas. And I said, yes, Article 14 of the Constitution, dignity of man is guaranteed. So dignity of man is guaranteed, not to be classified as a man who is a criminal or not a criminal. The human being has been conferred this dignity. I said, yes, you can do a lot. And lo and behold, the Supreme Court of Pakistan held unequivocally that even the worst criminal is entitled to his dignity as a man, and the crime committed by him does not denude him of such a right, which is referable to his belonging to the human race and not to his belonging to the community of criminals. So this is what the Supreme Court held, and this is my background contribution to that. Unquote. Mind you, an imprisoned offender, though deviant in his sociological responses or interaction, is still a human being, and compassion, more than cruelty or hatred, can go a long way in curing his deviance. Point number 2, and this is interesting. The years of imprisonment are not just numbers. On a normal day, a bench of 3 judges is hearing a criminal appeal in a high court or the Supreme Court, and the case is nothing but run-of-the-mill. While deciding the question of an appropriate sentence of imprisonment for the offender, one judge, and now the Honorable former Chief Justice of Lahore High Court will appreciate it more when the judges, after hearing the case, confer with each other. One judge proposes 6 years. The second judge suggests, no, it should be 8 years. And the third judge carries the day by persuading the other 2 to settle for a middle ground, and the offender is sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. Unfortunately, all this is done quite casually and without any sensitivity to the consideration as to how long 1 year actually is, and that too in the miserable and wretched conditions of a prison. Let me give you a couple of examples to show how long 1 year away from your family, friends, and home actually is. Before his elevation as a judge of the Lahore High Court, Mr. M.R. Kiani, the legendary Justice M.R. Kiani, he was a district and sessions judge. And in one of his books, he had described his transfer to Dera Ghazi Khan, which is my hometown. He was transferred to Dera Ghazi Khan, and this is what he writes in his book, that my transfer was an exile. The word exile used by him was sufficient to convey the pain and anguish he had felt over being far away from his home and over his prolonged separation from his family and friends. The other example is that of an honorable judge of the Lahore High Court, who was my colleague and is a very dear friend. For reasons quite obvious, I shall not name him. He was sent to Bahawalpur bench of the said court for a period of 1 year. नए नए जजेस लगते हैं तो इधर उधर बेंचेस पे भेजते हैं कि 1 साल के लिए, and Justice Qasim Khan knows about it. I had spent 2.5 years in Multan immediately after becoming a judge, so I was wondering कि मैं फायदे में रहा हूँ नुकसान में रहा हूँ. For reasons quite obvious, I shall not name him, and he is a very dear friend and now a very senior judge. He was sent to Bahawalpur bench of the said court for a period of 1 year. It is in my personal knowledge that within a couple of months' stay at Bahawalpur, he became so homesick and dejected that he used to literally cry out loud with a string of tears rolling down his judicial cheeks. He was so depressed that he sought refuge in poetry and in putting flowers in his books, waiting for them to dry up so as to represent his own dried up soul. Let me observe here without any fear of contradiction that although while serving in a district as a district and sessions judge and while serving at a bench of a high court, a judge of the high court spends his time of service in the lap of luxury, and all possible respect and facility is extended to him by the people at large and the local administration. Yet, a period of 1 year away from the family, friends, and home looks like infinity to him. And I can tell you from my own experience, after a few weeks or months, every day of that year looks like a year in itself. So I can tell you from my own experience that after a few weeks or months, every day of that year looks like a year in itself. In sharp contradistinction to that 1 year of luxury turned into misery for a district and sessions judge or a judge of the high court, kindly imagine the plight of a prisoner in jail and visualize how long a period of 1 year would be for him while living in the all too well known, appalling, deplorable, and cruel conditions of a prison. You would be relieved to know that your task of imagining and visualizing such a plight has been made easier by Oscar Wilde in his ballad of the Reading Gaol. Jail ko pehle English mein gaol kehte the, G-A-O-L, gaol, old English mein. So Oscar Wilde wrote a ballad, and the title was The Ballad of Reading Gaol. And his words are beautiful. He says, I know not whether laws are right or whether the laws are wrong. All that we know who live in gaol is that the wall is strong and that each day is like a year whose days are long. Unquote. I may take this opportunity to remind the judges present and the honorable people associated with the legal profession in this room and beyond that tempering justice with mercy is not a hackneyed cliche in the legal jargon, but it is also a religious command. Adl bil ihsan. It is therefore expected that the years in a sentence of imprisonment of an offender would no longer be treated casually by judges as just numbers, and the question of a term of imprisonment for an offender would henceforth receive a consideration tempered with due sensitivity and compassion. Let me propose, and I am not joking, that it may not be a bad idea if it is made obligatory for the lawyers and judges handling criminal cases to spend a few days with prisoners inside a prison after regular intervals, so that they gain first-hand knowledge of the plight of prisoners and the actual conditions inside a prison. It might be of some interest to you to know that as a student of law at the University of Cambridge, I, along with all my classmates, had been taken to the Chelmsford prison, and we had to spend one full day with the prisoners inside that prison, of course, not as offenders, but as observers. Point number 3. Imprisonment means separation from the community only and nothing more. A term of imprisonment awarded against an offender simply means that by way of punishment for his misdeed, the offender is to be separated from the community for a fixed period of time. Excommunication of the offender in the medieval times was meant to serve the same purpose. Even in the present times, the panchayats in some of our villages still resort to the same punishment by ordering the wrongdoer to leave the village and not to communicate with his fellow villagers for a fixed or an indefinite period. Now that we have prisons to house the offenders, the object of imprisonment remains the same, that is, to punish the offender by separating him from the community. It is of utmost importance to understand that in such a case, the punishment is his separation from the community by limiting his daily life to the confines of a prison, and there is no warrant in any law to punish him further through a cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment inside the prison merely because he is a prisoner. The point which I want to make is that once inside a prison, the prisoner cannot be punished by the prison authorities over and above the sentence passed against him by the court unless he breaks some of the laws relating to prisons for which he can be dealt with as provided by the law. Excuse me. Dishing out cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment to a prisoner merely because he is a prisoner is not countenanced either by the Constitution or by any other law. The right to life with its normal attributes, Article 9, prohibition against slavery, Article 11, and inviolability of dignity of man, Article 14, are some of the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution, and such rights are equally available to an imprisoned offender with necessary adaptations. This means that every effort is to be made by the state to provide the necessary amenities of life to the prisoners. They are not to be treated as slaves, and their dignity as human beings is not to be violated. In short, an offender is to be punished by keeping him in prison, and he is not to be punished further merely because he is a prisoner. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has already settled this issue in the above-mentioned case of In re Suo Motu Constitutional Petition 1994, and the relevant part I've already read out. Point number 4, and this is extremely important, and nobody bothers to even think about it. The point is that wives, children, and dependents of imprisoned offenders are punished without any fault of their own. I have spent almost half a century in the field of law, and I have yet to come across any judge who, while passing or upholding a sentence of imprisonment against an offender, is sensitive to the fact that while sending an offender to prison, he is also inflicting a punishment of a different kind upon the offender's wife and children and his other dependents who have not committed any offense at all. माँ बाप बूढ़े साथ रह रहे होते हैं, बच्चे स्कूल गोइंग हैं या पढ़ रहे हैं या छोटे हैं, suckling babies हैं, wives, they have their own rights and somebody is to provide for them. In a country like ours, it is generally the poor who end up in prisons or languish therein for long periods, and that is because they cannot afford proper legal assistance, as good and competent lawyers are, and I say so with great respect for the noble profession of law, generally becoming more and more money-minded. I can narrate to you an incident. I was a young lawyer and somebody came, some industrialist, some big businessman who was arrested for some offense. His son came to me and then we started knowing each other well, and I was pursuing that case for his bail very diligently and very passionately, and because he was a resourceful person, so I thought if I win this case, I'll have many more cases from his associates and others. So I was very keen in pursuing that case. And one day, he was sitting in my office and he said, "Sir, you look very anxious in getting this case fixed for hearing, his bail matter." I said, "Shouldn't I be anxious? Your father is in jail." He said, "Sir, yes, on papers he is in jail." I was shocked. And then he told me something, and even the human rights people sitting here should notice this, that he said, "Actually, our driver is in jail in the name of my father." And they had managed everything, and the poor driver was in jail by the name of that businessman. And the businessman was sleeping in the luxury of his own bedroom. The accused persons with a comfortable financial background either successfully manage to avoid going to prison or they get out of it rather early. An offender with a poor financial background is, by and large, the sole, and this is important, this is so close to my heart, an offender with a poor financial background is, by and large, the sole breadwinner for his wife and children and his other dependents. And when he is put behind the bars, his wife and children and other dependents are literally left with no source of income or sustenance at all. In such an unfortunate situation, they initially have to become dependents of some other relatives, or when that relative starts feeling the pinch, the prisoner's wife is driven to beggary or to many other social or moral vices. His children are forced to lead the lives of orphans, their education is disturbed or discontinued, and further down the lane, all such dependents become vulnerable to the lures of the world of crime. It is a food for thought that if punishing one offender with a sentence of imprisonment opens up a possibility of producing more criminals, whereas the original objective behind such an exercise was the exact opposite of it, then there has to be something seriously wrong with the system being practiced. I have personally seen people, if somebody is in jail, his wife would start coming to you or some relative would start coming to you for legal help, and then after a time they will just disappear. And we used to wonder as lawyers, where have these people gone? Are their matters settled? But then I realized through experience that no, they have run out of resources. And they have left everything to God and to the court. And the court has no time for them because nobody is pushing their case. This is a very, very serious issue. Sorry. Thank you very much. There is, however, a silver lining available. Now there is a solution available, which I am going to suggest. There is, however, a silver lining available, and a hint of a solution to this issue is to be found in the Constitution itself. According to the provisions of Article 10(8) of the Constitution, when a person is preventively detained and the initial period of his detention is to be extended, then such extension of the period shall be decided by the appropriate review board, which, and I quote the constitutional provision, which shall determine the place of detention of the person detained and fix a reasonable subsistence allowance for his family. There is also a problem here, and that is that such fixing of subsistence allowance for the family is applicable and relevant only to cases of preventive detention, and according to the provisions of Article 10(4) of the Constitution, preventive detention may be permissible only in cases of persons acting in a manner prejudicial to the integrity, security, or defense of Pakistan, or any part thereof, or external affairs of Pakistan, or public order, or the maintenance of supplies and services. इतने बड़े जुर्म के लिए फैमिली की सब्सिस्टेंस स्टेट देगी. कोई मामूली जुर्म कर ले तो भूखा मरेगा. So now just wait for the advice that I used to give. कि अगर कुछ करना ही है तो फिर कुछ बड़ा करके जाओ, बच्चे तो भूखे ना मरे. It is nothing but ironical that if a person issues a verbal threat to another in the ordinary course of his private dealings, or if he commits a petty trespass or theft and is imprisoned for such a crime, then the state cares a fig for his family or its sustenance in his absence. But if the same person is preventively detained over an extremely serious issue of acting in a manner prejudicial to the integrity, security, or defense of Pakistan, or any part thereof, or external affairs of Pakistan, or public order, or the maintenance of supplies or services, then the state is obliged to take care of his family and to pay a subsistence allowance to it. In such a bizarre situation, a prudent advisor to a potential poor criminal would advise him that if he has to commit a crime, then he should go for a serious one, like threatening the integrity and security or defense of Pakistan, etc., as a result of which his family would be taken care of by the state, and not to go for an ordinary crime, as a consequence of which his sourceless family would starve to death. Mark my words, the day may not be far away when some minor daughter or old wife or parent of an imprisoned offender may file a constitution petition before a high court or the Supreme Court, maintaining that she has not committed any offense, but by imprisoning her sole breadwinner on account of his having committed an offense, her right to life guaranteed by Article 9 of the Constitution has either been taken away or abridged. ये आप दोनों जो बात कर रहे हैं, मुझे लग रहा है पिटीशन तैयार हो रही है. होनी चाहिए. Why not? Nobody has thought about it so far in 75 years. I hope and expect that the state would pay heed to this serious issue before it raises its head before a court, in which situation the state may find it quite difficult to contest such a petition. Point number 5. I have 6 points, so I've already reached point 5. Be patient. Sentencing guidelines diminish discrimination. A prisoner in jail undergoing a sentence of imprisonment for 3 years for possession of church weighing 200 grams may ask another prisoner about his conviction and sentence, and may be shocked to know that the other prisoner has been sentenced to imprisonment for 2 years for possessing the same quantity of chars. He is likely to feel discriminated against and would consider it unfair. In the case of Ghulam Murtaza and another versus the state, PLD 2009, Lahore 362, a full bench of the Lahore High Court, Lahore, had addressed this issue and had issued sentencing guidelines to be generally followed in cases involving recovery of contraband narcotic substances. I had the privilege of authoring the judgment passed in that case, and in the opening part of the same, I had observed as follows, and I quote, "The quintessence of the civilization's evolution and growth in the legal field is a progression from dispensation of justice according to the principle of justice, equity, and good conscience to justice according to law. The rationale or raison d'etre for this momentum, quite easy to discern and comprehend, is that justice ought not to be administered according to the whims, caprice, or subjective standards of an individual judge, but it should be dispensed according to some codified or stipulated standards so as to render the outcome consistent and reasonably predictable. Predictability of judicial response to an action or inaction of a person is important because by and large, people living in a community adapt or mold their conduct, keeping in view the law of the land and a probable judicial reaction to their actions or inactions. The essence, therefore, is that proverbially speaking, justice should not vary with the size of the chancellor's foot. But a person inviting a legal intervention into his conduct should be able to appreciate in advance as to how he is likely to be treated by a judge dealing with the application of the relevant law to that person's conduct. Uniformity and standardization of judicial response to similar legal situations cannot thus be overemphasized. Of late, it has been noticed by this court that in the matter of passing sentences in cases of recovery of contraband narcotic substances under the Control of Narcotic Substances Act 1997, different judges, both at the trial and the appellate stages, have been passing sentences upon convicts placed in similar situations, which sentences are quite often hideously variable and they oscillate and fluctuate between unduly lenient and grossly oppressive. Such discrepant and vacillating judicial responses to similar situations not only give rise to confusion and uncertainty, but they also encourage unscrupulous litigants and lawyers to try to shop for a suitable judge. We have carried out a survey of all the cases reported in various law reports of the country to find out the sentencing trends of different courts and judges in cases involving recovery of contraband narcotic substances. And the information gathered through the said survey shows quite strikingly that the sentencing trends in cases of recovery of contraband narcotic substances vary quite sharply, and judicial responses in that regard differ quite drastically, even in situations which may be similar, if not identical. Such variable approaches clearly underscore the importance of uniformity and standardization in matter of sentencing in this area, and thus the efficacy and necessity of adopting a sentencing policy in that regard cannot be overstated." Unquote. Issuance of sentencing guidelines by the superior judiciary or the Ministry of Law or a law commission or a similar institution is a practice which is gaining momentum in the civilized world, and the United Kingdom and Canada are stealing the march in this respect. Such guidelines make the task of a judge in the matter of sentencing an offender easier, and standardization of sentences substantially obviates the chances of discrimination amongst convicts placed similarly. I would therefore recommend that sentencing guidelines should be prepared and introduced in our country in all major areas of criminal law, as such an exercise would go a long way in protecting and enforcing the fundamental right of the prisoners enshrined in Article 25 of the Constitution. My last and sixth point. I'm sorry I'm taking a lot of time. I don't know how many minutes were allocated, but I am almost close to the finish. Sixth point is the concept of suspended sentence and release on parole need a favorable, fresh consideration. It is only fair to understand that if the object of imprisoning of an offender is his reformation and rehabilitation, then during his imprisonment, he needs to be afforded an opportunity to demonstrate and establish that he has made a serious and sincere effort to reform himself and that he is ready for rehabilitation in the society as its normal member. The concepts of suspended sentence and release on parole are to be found embedded in many provisions of different laws of the country relevant to criminal cases. It would be preposterous to hold that for every kind of offense, only serving out the full sentence of imprisonment may reform the offender. There may be many petty offenses wherein a real and present threat of going to prison in case of repetition of the offense or misbehavior may deter an offender appropriately and may reform him. Similarly, in cases of longer sentences for more serious offenses, the offender may be released on parole after some time of imprisonment to establish his reformation and readiness for rehabilitation. Denial of such opportunities to the offender or the prisoner may, in the words of Shakespeare, amount to insisting upon a pound of flesh, which I, for one, would not advocate. It is of fundamental importance to appreciate in this context that a judge must never allow himself to put on the mantle of a victim or his family who may have revenge or retribution as their motivation, but a judge must always act as a neutral arbiter, trying to achieve a balance between punishment and reformation, and between retribution and rehabilitation. I would end this paper by quoting Bassanio in Shakespeare's play Merchant of Venice. बड़ा इल्ज़ाम है कि मैं लिटरेचर में बड़ा चला जाता हूँ, लेकिन जो कुछ वो लिख गए हैं उनको और तरह से बयान करना पॉसिबल नहीं होता कई दफ़ा, कूज़े में दरिया को बंद कर देते. I would end my paper by quoting Bassanio in Shakespeare's play Merchant of Venice, when he was beseeching in the Duke's court for release of a prisoner, as Bassanio was ready to pay off the debt of that prisoner many times over. वो किसी ने उधार लिया था या डील की थी, पैसे देने थे, वो नहीं दे सक रहा था, प्रिजन में था, तो बसानिया कोई अच्छे दिल का मालिक था, उसने कहा जी इसके पैसे मैं भर देता हूँ, छोड़ दे, बल्कि इसके कई गुना मैं देने को तैयार हूँ, इसको छोड़ दे. उसने जो ड्यूक की कोर्ट में कहा वो ये था, कोर्ट, yes, here I tender it for him in the court, yes, twice the sum. If that will not suffice, I will be bound to pay 10 times over, on forfeit of my hands, my head, my heart. मतलब जमानत में मैं अपने हाथ, अपनी गर्दन भी देने को तैयार हूँ, बस ये पैसे ले लें और छोड़ दें इसको. If this will not suffice, अगर फिर भी आप जज साहब राजी नहीं होते, ड्यूक साहब, if this will not suffice, it must appear that malice bears down truth. And I beseech you, ये जो इतनी खूबसूरत आगे दो sentences आ रहे हैं, and I beseech you, rest once the law to your authority, to do a great right, do a little wrong. So, एक आम आदमी कह सकता है, वकील तो नहीं कह सकता कोर्ट में, लेकिन वो चूँकि वकील या जज नहीं था, लॉमैन नहीं था, तो उसने कह दिया कोर्ट में, उसने कहा जी अगर आप ये भी मेरे ऑफ़र नहीं मानते तो फिर नीयत में फ़र्क लगता है मुझे, और कोई बात नहीं है, कोई कानून बहुत ज़्यादा रास्ते में आ रहा है तो थोड़ा सा हट के कर दें. Rest once the law to your authority to do a great right, do a little wrong, and curb this cruel devil of his will. Unquote. I would not ask you to do a little wrong to do a great right, but I would certainly request you to show compassion, mercy, and empathy when it comes to attending to the plight of a helpless human being rotting like a vegetable inside the strong and high walls of a prison. Now, my paper ends here, but when I was coming to this hall, something occurred to me, and as a parting thing, I would like to say that, if you permit, that our understanding or appreciation of things is generally conditioned by our own circumstances. MashaAllah, we are comfortable in life, so the walls of a prison, all those miseries and cruelties are highlighted to us, and we think this is too much. I'll give you, every coin has another side also. So I'll give you an instance of some poor person who was imprisoned and he was sent to jail in Dera Ghazi Khan. He wrote a letter to his family from inside the jail. Now this is an eye-opener. I can't read the whole letter, but the gist was, and it was in Saraiki language, but I'll translate it in English. The gist was, the accommodation is free. The accommodation is free. The rooms are pakka and cemented. Electricity is available full time. There is no load shedding. Fans are available in every room. Mattresses are provided for beds. Food is served 3 times every day without fail. We get to eat meat on many days of the week. This is not a small thing. He says, and I remember there was a lawyer who was not very successful, and one day he just stopped his scooter when I was crossing the road to go to the court, and he started talking to me. He said that I'm doing all right. कम से कम एक दिन मैं मुर्गी ज़रूर खिलाता हूँ family को. So this poor prisoner writes to the family that we get to eat meat on many days of the week. Free medical help is available, and even medicines are free. Everything is free of cost, and we don't have to pay for anything. Life is good, and survival is not an issue. You also come. Saraiki usne kaha, tusaं vi aavanjo. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my lord, for those insightful remarks, peppered not only with judicial references, but also a healthy dose of literary references as well. Now, moving on to the next segment, not only does this event serve to launch the hard copy of our flagship book, Serving Time, Pakistan's Prisons Through the Ages, but we are also concurrently launching our interactive webpage, which provides an immersive and layered online experience. I'm going to now invite my colleague Jan Hussain, who has worked extensively on the website content, to talk a little bit more about what the interactive webpage contains. Jan, if you will, please.
Can I just use this mic? Okay. Thank you, Zarnab. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. We are honored to have you with us as we unveil and launch the interactive webpage of our book, which is now live at www.jppreforms.com. And after the event, I'd invite you to go onto the interactive screens, which are on my left-hand side, to experience this website for yourself. The book, written by Radha Shah, Serving Time, Pakistan's Prison Through the Ages, has many, many strengths. It is an anthropological look, a historical look, a social and a political look at the development of the penal and prison system, starting from the Mughal era, going through the British, and the contemporary dynamics after the creation of Pakistan in 1947. But while these are the strengths of the book, there's one thing that stands out the most. And those are the narratives of former prisoners that the author collected from all across Pakistan from various jails. And these are precisely the elements that we have decided to highlight in our interactive page, precisely to make them interactive. And we've done that by having them as voiceovers available on the website, which are recorded by professional voiceover artists. And these narratives, for each chapter, you can find 2 to 3 narratives that are available for you to listen to, and each chapter points to particularities of the provinces of Pakistan. So Punjab, we talk about religious discrimination. In Sindh, in KP, and Balochistan, we talk about ethnic discrimination. And of course, there's gender. So the geography of prisons in Pakistan is also the geography of the disenfranchisement in Pakistan. And you can hear those narratives come through when you listen to them on the website. But before we go in the narratives, there are voice notes by the author herself. For each chapter, she begins and introduces that chapter and goes into a detailed analysis of it. And once you listen to that, and then you listen to the author, to the prisoner's narratives, you can combine the analysis with the experience. And you get a full picture of the realities across prisons in Pakistan. As you can see, there are many different visual elements and textual elements available on the website as well that guide you through it, starting from history and taking you all the way to the present. And these narratives are not the only interactive element that we have on this page. We also have detailed data sheets and data sets available that are interactive. And for that, I would like to invite my colleague Zille to talk to you more about that.
Thank you, Janzeb. So other than the book, the second significant part of our interactive web page is data dashboards. And can we have a look? Yeah. So data dashboards. And interesting part about these data dashboards is that these describe current situation of all the prison population prevailing in all the prisons in all provinces. And we have made these data dashboards separately for all the prisons and for women too. So if you click on any, all these graphics are interactive. If you click on any data point that you need the details of, it will provide you the numerical figure as well as the description of whatever that number says. And to give you an overview, whatever is happening and or what these data dashboards are highlighting, I would like to point some issues that we could find by looking at these data sets. Those include overcrowding in almost all of our provinces, under a significantly long under trial period, lack of infrastructure, discrimination against women, and surprisingly, there are 93% juveniles who are still under trial out of all the juvenile prisoners that are there. And we also analyzed data for last 5 years, and we could see there is continuous increasing trend for all the population in all the provinces. So this continuous trend has also resulted in a significant gap between number of prisoners prevailing in the jails and authorized capacity of jails. So that's another issue. Findings of each data dashboard would depict a different issue for all the provinces, and even detailed interpretation of what these numbers or statistics would say. We have published a fact sheet 2022 for that, and that's presented in all the tables. Please have a look. Thank you.
Thank you, Janzeb and Zille, for breaking that down. Our interactive webpage can be accessed at www.jpprisonreforms.com. And the entire book, a copy of which you will have at your tables, the digital copy of that book is also available for download on that website. Moving swiftly onwards, we now have a panel discussion entitled The State of Prison Reforms in Pakistan. And to moderate that discussion, we have Mr. Ijaz Haider, who is a senior journalist and analyst. A little bit about Ijaz before we invite him on stage to moderate. Ijaz has been a newspaper man since '91, starting his career at the Frontier Post, Lahore. During his career, he has held several editorial positions and was the news editor of Friday Times and the executive editor of Daily Times. He's been affiliated with a number of different television channels and newspapers, and he was a Ford Scholar at ACDIS, the program in Arms Control, Disarmament, and International Security at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He has written extensively for publications at home and abroad, including the Friday Times, Daily Times, Express Tribune, Pakistan Today, Times of India, and so on and so forth. His areas of interest include defense and foreign policies, nuclear strategy, theories and concepts of war, international relations, statecraft, literature, satire, and he currently writes a weekly column for Bol News English Weekly. So without further ado, I'd like to call Ijaz to please take his seat upon stage and we can begin moderating. Oh, he's getting mic'd up. That's fine. We can move on to introducing the rest of the panelists. First up, we have Mr. Azhar Rashid Khan, who is the Director General for the National Academy for Prisons Administration. Mr. Khan has had an illustrious career in the civil services spanning over 3 decades. He currently serves as the DG for Napa, and prior to this appointment, he served as the Director for the Gender Crime Cell at the National Police Bureau. In this role, he spearheaded the Gender Responsive Policing Project and was actively involved in overseeing research projects dealing with gender-based violence. He has previously served as DIG Operations for Pakistan Railway Police, DIG in Sindh, and as an SSP and DIGP in Balochistan. He's also served as an advisor to the UN mission in Kosovo and as a project coordinator for the UN ODC in Tajikistan. He holds a bachelor's in law from the Federal Urdu University of Arts and a master's in political science from Karachi University. So Azhar Rashid Khan Sahib, if you could please come up on stage. Moving on, also on our panel is Mr. Nadeem Ashraf, who is the Commissioner, Punjab, for the National Commission for Human Rights. Mr. Ashraf is a law graduate holding a postgrad diploma from University of Connecticut in USA and has served in the Pakistan Administrative Service for 35 years. He has also worked as subdivisional magistrate and district magistrate in various districts. Previously, he has served as an additional Secretary Home, Secretary Education, and Senior Member Board of Revenue Punjab. He has been Federal Secretary, Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis, and Secretary, Ministry of Human Rights. And most recently, he's been appointed as the member National Commission for Human Rights from Punjab by the government of Pakistan. So Nadeem Ashraf Sahib, if you could please. Also on the panel, we have Barrister Muhammad Ahmed Pansota. After studying from HSM College Lahore, he did his LLB from UCL and his bar at law from Inns of Court School Law, London, and was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 2005. He started his career with Cornelius Lane and Mufti and became the founding partner of Ahmed and Pansota in 2007. He practices in areas of public interest, constitutional, banking, criminal, civil, revenue, employment, labor, harassment, intellectual property service, and service law. He regularly appears before the higher and subordinate courts of the country, and Barrister Pansota has also served on numerous governmental committees that have proposed groundbreaking legislation. He also teaches at CNAID and University of Management Technology. Mr. Pansota, if you could please. Lastly, we have Ms. Zille Huma. Ms. Zille is a statistician and researcher with a background of statistics and research methodologies who has worked for the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, Ministry of Defense, and Stats Department at the Quaid-e-Azam University and Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. She is currently working as a data and research lead for Justice Project Pakistan as a faculty member of maths and data science at Air University, Islamabad, and has experience of more than 5 years working in government and private sector, and has taught in leading public sector universities. Joining us online is the author of the report, Radha Shah. Ms. Shah is a researcher and writer with a background in social anthropology and South Asian studies, and has worked with non-profit organizations in Canada and Pakistan. She is currently working as a research and policy lead at a Hong Kong migrant women's rights organization and has spent 5 years working in Pakistan in the development and social justice sector and has also taught at Aga Khan University. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Ijaz to start off the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarnab. Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Ji.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, it's great to be here. Thank you to Sarah Bilal, all the colleagues at JBP. I think it's a good opportunity to tell my own colleagues at JPP that I have long been dissociated with Sustainable Development Policy Institute. That was the last stint that I did with them was back in 2012. Somehow it keeps creeping into my CV whenever JPP puts one out. In fact, it's there on my name tag also. But it's great, as I said, it's great to be here. It's a very important book. Just a word about the book before we get to the panel for further discussion. This book is not just about the state of prisons in Pakistan and why it is important to reform the institution and how. Those are, of course, very important aspects of what it contains. The importance of the role of judiciary is also flagged, as are recommendations for the judiciary. There's also the discussion of whether some offenses should beget an offender, especially a first-time offender, a jail term. However, what to me is very important and makes the book more than just a report with stats is its grounding in the Foucauldian concept of carceral culture, and which, among other things, relates to who ends up in prison. And I think that's a very important aspect of this book. To make this point clear, let me quote from the book. The impetus for prison rules reform is based on the idea that if regulations in the aforementioned categories, and there are these categories in the book, are updated, improved procedures can be systematized, therefore resulting in fewer human rights violations. Absent from discussions on prison rules reform and prison reform, however, is the impetus behind the arrests being made and what sort of individuals are actually ending up as incarcerated. So, and this is an approach which runs as a motif through the book, the story of several former under trial and convicted prisoners across Pakistan's prison system in the 4 provinces of Punjab, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Balochistan. Experiences with arrest and incarceration in case of men, women, and juvenile ex-prisoners provide a historic and contemporary lens through which readers can comprehend the country's penal system as part of the legacy of colonial governance in the Indian subcontinent, the creation of Pakistan, and current-day political debates that preoccupy the country under the umbrella of insecurity. So this is broadly the sort of framework in and through which various other things have been discussed in the book. Do we already have the writer with us? Okay. So, so my colleague Zarnab has already introduced the panel. We also have with us the writer, the author of this book, Dr. Radha Shah. You will probably have to unmute yourself. Yes, yes, now I can hear you. It's great to have you back. In fact, you know, I do this fortnightly JPP live program, and I once had an earlier opportunity to have Dr. Shah with me on the program. So, Dr. Shah, I don't know if you could hear me when I was saying a few words about the book. Could you begin by telling us what the methodology was? And I ask this question because one of the possible criticisms that could come your way, and niche as an anthropologist, which is that you perhaps identified cases which could dovetail with your already assumed framework. So just give us a sense of what the methodology was and why you used that methodology.
terms of their experiences with incarceration. And what I mean by that is, what are the facilities that they can access in jail? What is the design of the jail? What is their day-to-day recording in progress? Tie up with the history of how prisons have been run, both in the colonial era and then in the post-colonial era. And there's a continuity between those two things. Now, in addition to that, one of the reasons that the prisoners, that the ex-prisoners who I interviewed ended up in prison had to do with their identities, largely marginalized identities. So that could mean marginalization according to class, and that they're deeply impoverished, or it could mean marginalization due to religious identity or due to cultural identity. All of these existing identities, the things that land in the prison, then intersect with how they have access to resources, what their day-to-day life is like, which is to say that their experiences in prison, which are already extremely tough and involve being violated, these are further compounded due to their identity. So, yes, there is a to and fro, analytically speaking, where I am looking at the story and then the story becomes a lens with which to look back at the past. And then the past is also a framework with which to understand what it is that they are going through.
Right. So yes, you have the literature review. You also go back to the Mughal era. You have quoted scholars who have talked about the architecture of the prisons during the Raj. And you also talk about the economy of extortion and the rest of it. But just to go back to my point with a couple of specific examples, where you talk about Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and you talk about Balochistan, for instance, and there's one specific prisoner in Balochistan who is, what one would call a petty offender. But most of those cases have to do with dissent and the politics as it unfolds within the larger framework of securitization, or what you call in the book the umbrella of insecurity. Whether that is the PTM, whether that's the BSO students. So I just wanted to know, why was there that focus? I'm not saying that that's unjustified. What I'm saying is that in terms of looking at prisons and the reforms, there is a very large category of prisoners that where you could have dealt with those who are involved in petty offenses or in bigger offenses. Why a particular focus on the political prisoners, if I will, or people who have been accused of terrorism, etc.?
So the book covers both political prisoners and ordinary prisoners. So if we're looking at the chapter on Balochistan, two of the prisoners are ordinary prisoners, and one of them was disappeared and wound up in detention. So the reason I put these two together, if we're taking Balochistan as an example, is because there's a very valuable juxtaposition to consider. So the ordinary prisoners, one of them was deeply impoverished. He describes essentially living in a hut, and he is the only breadwinner in his family, and he is unable to support that family. And it's for this reason that he turns to petty crime. The other ordinary prisoner had relative class privilege in comparison to very poor prisoner. He essentially found himself entrapped in a murder case, and holds that he did not commit political agitation in Balochistan, what many people are calling for is for access to resources, for education in particular. And as we know, people like this are unfairly treated due to speaking up the forms of disenfranchisement they face as part of the political process. So what I was trying to show is that you have one of two choices. You can be an ordinary person and due to your poverty, you can end up in prison. Or you can speak up about it and be penalized both by the law and by extrajudicial law.
Okay. Now, in the book, obviously, you talk about reforms. You have lots of recommendations for the judiciary also, for the prison authorities also. You mention attempts that have been made towards reforming the prisons. But the implicit argument also is, and as I said in my opening, it kind of runs as a motif through the book, which is that unless we realize, or the state realizes, what kind of people are getting incarcerated, and you obviously link it up with the colonial times and how the British categorized various ethnicities and so on and so forth. So without understanding who the people who are getting incarcerated, all these reforms or the aforesaid categories will be, in a sense, taking place in a vacuum. So just give us a sense of how you think that is a condition that can be achieved.
So if we're looking at colonial history in terms of techniques of governance in the subcontinent, much of this had to do with the criminalization of cultural identities, which were arbitrarily defined as deviant. But following that arbitrary definition of religious minorities, certain occupational categories, castes, and cultures broadly that sat outside of majoritarian understandings of Hinduism or majoritarian understandings of Islam, it's that creation of a notion of deviance and a whole kind of logic around it, which is documented in vast administrative tracts, vast traffic laws. That definition of deviance is what sets in motion the criminalization of identity many, many years later. And that criminalization of identity is what is sending people to prison, as was covered also of the book. And we have to understand that if we are thinking about people going to prison because of poverty, yes, certainly that is the case. But people also hold identities alongside disenfranchisement from privilege. So that can be religious, that can be cultural, that can be on the basis of gender. And then it's that intersection that gets compounded as a means to arrest people if they ask for more, if they ask for equality, if they start to criticize the ways in which these access is being prevented. And when they do that, that's when they end up in prison.
Okay. Stay with me, Dr. Shah. Let me also pull in other panelists here. اظہر خان صاحب، یہ جو بات ہو رہی ہے اس کو اگر تھوڑا سا سادہ طریقے سے میں پوچھوں کہ اس وقت اگر 10,000 پرزنرز ہیں، قیدی ہیں، آپ کے تجربے میں ان 10,000 میں سے کتنی تعداد ایسی ہے جس کو جیل میں نہیں ہونا چاہیے تھا، یا جیسے کمیونٹی سروس کی بات ہوتی ہے اور طریقہ کار ہیں جن کو استعمال کر کے، ضروری نہیں ہے خاص طور پہ فرسٹ ٹائم افینڈرز یا جو جوونائل وہ ہیں، اور یہ دنیا کے باقی ممالک میں یہ ہوتا بھی ہے، تو ذرا تھوڑا سا اس پہ روشنی ڈالیں کہ یہ اتنی بڑی تعداد میں، اور اوور کراؤڈنگ کا بھی ایک مسئلہ ہے، یہ تو سب کو ہی معلوم ہے، تو یہ بتائیے کہ اس کے حوالے سے کیا اصلاحات کی جا رہی ہیں یا کیا اصلاحات ہو سکتی ہیں؟
شکریہ۔ ویسے تو اس کتاب کے اندر کافی ڈیٹیل کے اندر پریزن پاپولیشن تمام صوبوں کی بتائی ہوئی ہے، لیکن جو سب سے اہم مسئلہ وہ یہ ہے کہ یہ سارے کے سارے پرزنرز جو ہیں ایک کنوکٹڈ پرزنرز نہیں ہوتے ہیں۔ مور دین 50% آف پریزن پاپولیشن ان پاکستان، آل اوور پاکستان بائی اینڈ لارج، از آف دوز ہو آر انڈر ٹرائل۔ اچھا، وہ یہ ہے کہ ہمارے 50% سے زیادہ ہی،
سو مطلب یہ ہے کہ جو میں نے ایک
جو بھی سزا جو بھی ڈکلیئر
اسیوم جو فگر دیا 10,000 کا، اس میں سے 5,000 جو ہیں وہ ان کا ٹرائل ہوگا،
وہ ٹرائل میں ہیں، اور ابھی تک یہ مطلب حتمی فیصلہ نہیں کیا گیا کہ یہ واقعی ملزم سے مجرم بنیں گے یا صرف ملزم سے بری ہو جائیں گے۔ تو ایک تو یہ ہمارا جو سب سے بڑا فلا ہے، جس کی وجہ سے ہماری اوور کراؤڈنگ ہمیشہ سے رہی ہے اور رہتی رہی ہے، کیونکہ کبھی ہم نے یہ ڈسٹنکشن کی نہیں ہے۔ ہماری پریزن رولز کے اندر بھی اور ہمارے کرمنل جسٹس سسٹم کے اندر بھی بڑی ایک کہہ لیں کہ ایک لکونہ ہے کہ ایسے کوئی ان بٹوین میجرز نہیں ہے جس کے اندر ہم ملزم کو مجرم بننے سے پہلے کوئی ایک عام سٹیزن کے طور پہ ٹریٹ کر سکیں۔ تو لا محالہ جب اگر وہ ہمارے ہاں ایک کنسیپٹ، کلچرل کنسیپٹ بھی ہے کہ جب بھی کبھی کوئی ایف آئی آر لانچ ہوتی ہے تو مدعی کا سب سے پہلا تقاضا اس کے گرفتاری کا، چاہے چھوٹا جرم ہو چاہے بڑا جرم ہو، وہ ہوتا ہے۔ تو اس کی وجہ سے ہمارے جو جیلوں پہ برڈن آتا ہے، اس کی وجہ سے جتنی ریفرمیشن کی کہہ لیں یا کوئی سدھار کی کوشش ہونی چاہیے پریزن ایڈمنسٹریشن کو جو کرنی ہے، جو کرنٹ سیناریو میں بات چیت ہو رہی ہے، وہ ڈائیلوٹ ہو جاتی ہے، کیونکہ ان کی اٹینشن جو ہے وہ اس فائر فائٹنگ کے اوپر رہتی ہے کہ جو ڈیلی عدالتوں کے اندر پیشی کے اندر قیدی آ رہے ہوتے ہیں، جا رہے ہوتے ہیں، ان کے ملنے والے آ رہے ہوتے ہیں، وکلا حضرات آ رہے ہوتے ہیں، تو دے کین ناٹ کنسنٹریٹ آن اینی پراپر پروگرامس فار دی ریہیبلیٹیشن آف دا پرسن۔
اچھا مجھے یہ بتائیں، دیکھیں چیزوں میں ضروری نہیں کہ پہیہ ایجاد کیا جائے، پہیہ تو بہت سال صدیوں پہلے ایجاد ہو گیا تھا، تو دنیا میں بیسٹ پریکٹسز بھی ہوتی ہیں، اور یہ بھی کوئی ایسی انہونی بات نہیں ہے کہ ہم دیکھیں کہ بھائی باقی جگہوں پہ کیا ہوتا ہے، اس میں سے سب کچھ شاید ہم نہ اٹھا سکیں کیونکہ اپنا ایک سیاق و سباق بھی ہوتا ہے، لیکن بہت سی چیزیں جو ہیں وہ کی بھی جا سکتی ہے۔ تو کوئی ایسی کوشش کی ہے ہم نے کسی وقت کہ ہمیں پتہ چلے کہ باقی دنیا میں کیسے یہ معاملہ ہوتا ہے؟
بالکل کی ہے، بلکہ ہمارا ایک دو باقی دنیاؤں میں، باقی ممالک میں تو ایک طریقہ یہ ہے کہ وہ نان پینل پنشمنٹس کی طرف، کمیونٹی بیس پنشمنٹ کو بھی وہ کنسیڈر کرنے لگے۔ پھر دوسرا یہ کہ کیٹیگرائزیشن اور کلاسیفیکیشن آف پرزنرز کے حساب سے بھی کچھ پاکستان میں بھی جیلیں پاسٹ میں ایسی رہی ہیں جو اوپن جیلز کا کنسیپٹ رکھے، جیسے برے والا وغیرہ میں، سندھ میں بھی ٹھٹا یا بدین کی ایک جیل ایسی تھی جہاں پہ قیدیوں کو ایک عام آدمی کے طور پہ رہنے کے رہتے، وہ کنفائنڈ اس میں تھے لیکن وہ قیدیوں سے زیادہ نارمل زندگی گزارنے کی کوشش کرتے تھے، تو ایک طرح سے ان کی ریہیبلیٹیشن اور ریفارمیشن کا سلسلہ ہو جاتا تھا۔ ہمارے ہاں بدقسمتی یہ ہے کہ ہم جیلوں کے اندر جو وہ اصلاحات لانے کی کوشش کرتے ہیں تو سب سے پہلے ہمارے اندر جیل کے اندر ایک جو ریزسٹنس آتی ہے وہ یہ آتی ہے کہ ہمارے رولز ان چیزوں کو انکارپوریٹ کرنے کے لیے امینڈ نہیں ہو پاتے، اتنی اسپیڈ سے امینڈ نہیں ہو
مطلب
پاتے۔
جیلوں کی انتظامیہ کی طرف سے
انتظامیہ کی طرف سے بھی اور ہمارے جو پالیسی میکنگ ادارے ہیں ان کے اندر بھی ایک ریلکٹنس یہ رہتی ہے کہ بہت سارے اسٹیک ہولڈر جب شامل ہو جاتے ہیں تو ہم کسی چیز کے اوپر یکسو ہو نہیں پاتے.
اچھا
گو ہم لوگوں نے کئی انٹرنیشنل ٹریٹیز اور پروٹوکالز سائن کیے ہوئے ہیں, ٹریٹمنٹ آف افینڈرس پہ بھی کیے ہوئے ہیں, رائٹس آف وکٹم پہ بھی کیے ہوئے, دوسری چیزوں پہ بھی کیے ہیں, اور ان کے لیے ہم کوشش کرتے بھی رہتے ہیں. اور جو سب سے بڑا ڈرا بیک ہمارے یہاں اس وقت پاکستان کے پریزن ریفارمز ہیں وہ یہ ہے کہ ہر صوبے نے اپنی ریفارمز کر رہے ہیں. دیر از نو اسٹینڈرڈائز میتھڈ آف ریفارمنگ دا پریزن سسٹم آف پاکستان. Unlike police, judiciary, and for that matter, prosecution and investigation, all of these branches of criminal justice system has been standardized all over Pakistan. By and large, ان کی hierarchy provincial ہی ہے, لیکن ان کے تمام ایک یکساں اسٹینڈرڈس ہیں. ابھی بھی یہ اس کتاب میں بھی آپ نے دیکھا ہوگا کہ ہر صوبے کی جیلوں کا جو نظام ہے اور ان کی جو کنڈکٹ ہے پرزنرس کے ساتھ, وہ ایک دوسرے سے بالکل نہیں تو کافی حد تک مختلف ہے. اس لیے کہیں آپ نے جیسا بلوچستان اور سندھ کی بات کر رہے تھے, بطور میں ایک ٹرینر کے طور پہ پریزن ایڈمنسٹریشن کے, ابھی ہم نے ایک کورس اناؤنس کیا سائیکالوجسٹ کا. تو ہمارے لیے بڑے اچنبے کی بات تھی کہ بلوچستان میں سائیکالوجسٹ ہیں ہی نہیں پریزنس کے اندر. تو اب اگر ایک اسٹیٹس ہے, ایک مینٹل اسٹیٹس ہے کسی قیدی کا, ہی از انڈر اسٹریس, اور اس کو کوئی ایک مینٹل کیئر کی ضرورت ہے یا اس کو ریہیبلیٹیشن کی ضرورت ہے, تو وہ تو ایک ڈبل جیپرڈی کے اندر آ گیا. ایک تو وہ قید میں بھی ہے اور دوسرا اس کا علاج بھی نہیں ہو رہا.
ٹھیک, اس میں ندیم اشرف صاحب ذرا یہ بتائیے کہ یہ کہیں ایسا تو نہیں ہے کہ ہمارا تصور یہ ہے کہ اگر کسی سے کوئی جرم سرزد ہو گیا ہے, یا اسیوم کہ جو ہے نا, کیونکہ جب تک وہ مجرم ثابت نہ ہو اس وقت تو ملزم ہے, لیکن جیل ایک بلیک ہول ہے جس کے اندر وہ بندہ چلا جاتا ہے, اور پھر وہ اس کے اندر بسا اوقات فرسٹ ٹائم اوفینڈرز کا جو کہتے ہیں ریسیڈیوزم, وہ دیٹ از اوڈ ٹو دا ویری ایکسپیرئنس دے ہیو ہیڈ ان اے جیل. تھوڑی سی روشنی ڈالیں اس کے اوپر کہ کیا یہ معاملہ ہے.
JPP for producing a very quality book work on, جس میں ہسٹوریکل پرسپیکٹیو بھی آ رہا ہے ہمارا سب کانٹیننٹ کا, کیونکہ جیلز کی جو ہسٹری ہے, پریزنس کی ہسٹری, تو اٹ گوز ٹو ٹائمز امیموریل. اینڈ they have produced in case studies, they have analyzed various cultures of jail in various provinces. جو آپ نے بات کی اس میں یہ ہے کہ دس از سم تھنگ دیٹ وی نیڈ ٹو ٹیک کیئر آف, کہ یہ واٹ از دا ایم آف دا پرزنز اینڈ ٹو گیو اے سینٹینس آف پرزن. تو اس میں پنشمنٹ کا اینگل ڈیفینیٹلی ہے, ریفارمیشن کا اینگل بھی ہے, اور واٹ وی نیڈ آلسو ٹو پروٹیکٹ دا بیسک ہیومن رائٹس آف ڈگنیٹی. ہمارا جب بات ہو رہی ہے, میں نے وی ہیو سائنڈ نمبر آف انٹرنیشنل کووننٹس اینڈ پروٹوکولس, جس میں وی آر باؤنڈ ڈاؤن ٹو پرزرو دا ڈگنیٹی اینڈ آلسو گو ان ٹو فار دا ریفارمیٹیو ایسپیکٹ. جب انڈر ٹرائل پرزنرس کی بات ہوئی, اس وقت اباؤٹ 64% آر انڈر ٹرائل پرزنرس, اور صرف ڈسٹرکٹ جیل لاہور میں جہاں دا پاپولیشن آف جیل از 4000 اگینسٹ اے کیپیسٹی آف 2000, اس میں 3000 جو ہیں دے آر انڈر ٹرائل, اینڈ سم ان ویری پیٹی offences. جو وچ از ایک اور وچ از ویری آئی تھنک الارمنگ فار اس ان دا NCHR is the number of drug addicts in prisons, which should also be taken care of. District jail Lahore mein, my personal experience when I visited that, there are 1000 drug addicts, and how the drugs reach the prisons, it's a big question mark. Jail authorities they time express their helplessness. So
اس کو تھوڑا سا, سوری میں مخل ہو رہا ہوں آپ کی بات میں, because a couple of times I've been to these jails, part of my journalistic work. وہاں پہ جس طریقے سے تلاشی ہوتی ہے اندر باہر جانے میں, اس میں جب تک کہ کوئی کلیوژن نہ ہو, اور اس کا ذکر بھی ہے اس کتاب میں, جو اکانومی آف ایکسٹورشن ہے, کہ کس طریقے سے لوگوں کے پاس سیل فون پہنچتے ہیں, کس طریقے سے اور جو ہے نا چیزیں پہنچ, تو یہ تو ڈائریکٹلی the jail administration is responsible. Otherwise, to ye cheezein andar nahi pahunch sakti.
Definitely जी आपका I think this is something which is very crucial because ये सारी जिम्मेदारी आती है jail administration की and they are responsible but as the things are जो ground realities की जब हम देखते हैं बात देखते हैं तो ये चीज़ें बड़ी rampant है इसका this angle also जब हम prison reforms की कोई भी बात करते हैं तो a very high quality of prison management in terms of accountability, in terms of their devotion and commitment to stop these things or malpractices, जो कि बड़ी deep rooted हैं, they are very deeply entrenched और इसका बड़ी historical background भी है, तो इसका ये बड़ा ज़रूरी है. Side by side, I think the other thing which I will come to, which basic हम life to right की बात करते हैं, मैं थोड़ा सा I'm slightly digressing also, that there is a number of deaths in prisons और यहाँ लाहौर जेल की जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा हूँ दो यके बाद देख रहे 2 दिनों में 2 डेथ्स हुई NCR took so motor cognizance of that. I called the record और उसमें judicial inquiries हुई दोनों में and the cases were closed as natural deaths. But something which was alarming to me was that the judicial inquiries were closed before the receipt of post-mortem report. So क्या ये दिया जाता है लेकिन it could be due to overdosage of drugs, it could be any other reason, to poisoning or whatever. तो वो भी एक aspect हमें देखना पड़ेगा कि right of life जो है अगर if proper medical care is not being provided or they are being exposed to narcotics or other such diseases and there is no control, so उनका एक right effect हो रहा है इसमें. So this aspect needs to be highlighted to the provincial government कि ये चीज़ आपने इसको टॉप प्रायोरिटी फोकस में रखना है. बात आपने बिल्कुल बजाया है कि अगर हम आज एक और जिक्र मैं करूँगा उसके बाद जो इसमें कि ये वन blasphemy accused, he is in Lahore prison district jail since 2008 और 2022 में हम बैठे हैं अभी तक उसका केस जो है वो ट्रायल कोर्ट में है. 14 years have passed and first कोर्ट में उसका केस चल रहा है.
तो उम्र कैद तो उसको वैसे ही हो.
उम्र कैद definitely he is being punished. 14 years तो आप वही उम्र कैद आप उसको कहेंगे वो ऑलरेडी भुगत चुका है और he was desperate कि मेरा ये कब केस होता है क्योंकि पेशा बढ़ जाए. तो ये चीज़ें हैं कि अगर हम सिस्टम में जो किताब में बुक हैज़ ऑल्सो मैंशनड अबाउट द क्रिमिनल जस्टिस रिफॉर्म सिस्टम कि ये जो अंडर ट्रायल प्रिजनर्स को अगर हम उनको मे बी रिलीज्ड ऑन बेल और वी हैव some system where the trial period is reduced and there it has to be taken very seriously at the highest judicial and the executive level कि आपको हमारे मोहतरम जज साहिबान बैठे हैं जजेस की तादाद बढ़ाई जा सकती है प्रोसिक्यूशन का वो और इफेक्टिव किया जा सकता है रिसोर्सेज एलोकेट किए जाएं you will ipso facto reduce the number of the prison population by safely by 40 to 50%.
या जिस तरह खान साहब कह रहे थे कि नॉन पीनल जो है वो सेंटेंसेस
जी उसमें एक ये भी नॉन पीनल सेंटेंसेस का कॉन्सेप्ट तो वेस्ट में तो बहुत ज़्यादा है कि आप पेरोल में चले जाते हैं हमारा पेरोल सिस्टम इज़ वेरी वीक पेटी ऑफेंसेस में पीपल आर लैंग्विशिंग इन जेल्स फॉर अ नंबर ऑफ ईयर्स और उसमें फिर जो आपकी बात है व्हेन दे आर मिक्स विद हार्डन क्रिमिनल्स देन दे कम आउट मे बी मोर हार्डन हमारा जो है और मोस्ट ऑफ देम आर फ्रॉम द लोअर इनकम ग्रुप्स जिसमें कि दे आर वेरी वल्नरेबल वंस दे कम आउट विदाउट एनी ट्रेड विदाउट एनी वोकेशन की फैसिलिटीज़ हम टेफ्ट की फैसिलिटीज़ की बात करते हैं लेकिन एक यहाँ देयर वर जुवेनाइल प्रिजनर्स का देयर इज अ पोर्शन ऑफ देयर इज नो सेपरेट प्रिजन हेयर तो लाहौर की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ उसमें देयर वाज नो टीचर देयर ही वाज मिसिंग और उसमें मैंने आया आज सुपरडेंट मैंने कहा वेर इज ही कहते जी वो छुट्टी पे है लेकिन एक स्टैंड बाय हमने किया एटॉकिज्म है द सीरियसनेस ऑफ रेफॉर्मेटिव एस्पेक्ट वो देखने में नहीं आती तो ये चीज़ें जब कंबाइन होती हैं तो हमारा ये जो मेजर्स हैं क्रिमिनल जस्टिस रिफॉर्म का साथ ही ये रेफॉर्मेटिव एस्पेक्ट को उसको अगर हम फोकस रखें वी विल बी गिविंग देम द राइट ऑफ डिग्निटी एंड राइट ऑफ लाइफ and which we are under obligation under our own constitution as well as the international covenants. تو اس اینگل سے ہم تو یہی سجیسٹ کرتے ہیں, اب کر بھی رہے ہیں پروونشل گورنمنٹ کو, کہ آپ ان ایسپیکٹس کو دیکھیں. ان ایسپیکٹ کو جو آپ نے بات کی کہ آپ نان پریزن پنشمنٹس ہیں ان کی طرف آپ جائیں. ابھی ایک بہت اچھا خوشائن فیصلہ ہے جس میں وومن پریزنس کی تعداد میں کمی آئے گی کہ دے وڈ بی ایڈمیٹڈ ٹو بیل ایکسیپٹ فار ایکسیپشن کیسز. آئی تھنک اٹس اے ویری لینڈ مارک ججمنٹ آف دا سپریم کورٹ. So these are where we can reduce the population and there should be a separate prisons juvenile کے حوالے سے میں ضرور بات کروں گا. prisons جو women کی ہیں ان کی تعداد کم ہے لیکن پھر بھی ان کا ہونا چاہیے. there should be separate juvenile prisons with special emphasis on their education, on their once they leave the prison they become an effective and more I would say honorable citizens of the society.
Okay.
ہم نے یہاں جو جوونائل افینڈرز آتے ہیں, سائیکالوجسٹ کی بات بھی میں بالکل اگری کرتا ہوں. سائیکالوجسٹ نہ صرف بلوچستان کا مسئلہ ہے بلکہ پنجاب کا بھی مسئلہ بھی ہے. there is a shortage of psychologists in the prisons. The role of the psychologist at times is goes to the back burner. پرائرٹی میں نہیں آتا. ہمارا جو کانسیپٹ ہے جی سائیکالوجسٹ یا سائیکیٹرسٹ کو کچھ ہمارا کوئی مینٹل بار ہے کہ اس کی ضرورت نہیں ہے, لیکن جتنے بھی جوونائل افینڈرز ہیں they need a very solid psychological and psychiatric treatment.
اوکے ٹھیک ہے. بیرسٹر کانسوٹا, پہلی چیز کا تو یہ فیصلہ کرنا ہے کہ ماڈل کیا ہے. ماڈل جو ہے وہ پینل ہے یا کریکشنل ہے, کیونکہ یہ آدھا تیزر و آدھا بٹیر تو ہو نہیں سکتا. ہم بات آئین کی بھی کر رہے ہیں یہاں پہ, ہم بات باقی رائٹ ٹو لائف اور یہ ساری چیزوں کی بات کر رہے ہیں, لیکن جو زمین پہ نظر آ رہا ہے وہ کریکشنل نظر نہیں آ رہا, وہ پینل نظر آ رہا ہے. ماڈل از ویری سیمس ٹو بی ویری کلیئر. I mean, it might be in contravention to, what the Constitution says or what the manual says, but on the ground, it's very clear that it's a penal model. So give me your sense of where the situation stands. And ایک اور چیز بھی, وہ یہ کہ اس طرح کی نشستوں میں ہم بیٹھ کے اچھی اچھی باتیں کرتے ہیں ہمیشہ, یہ بھی ہونا چاہیے, یہ بھی ہونا چاہیے. So the question really is کہ اگر ہمیں پتہ ہے کہ کیا ہونا چاہیے تو پھر وہ ہو کیوں نہیں رہا.
بڑے جی آپ نے دو ضروری سوال جو ان کی طرف آئی تھنک اٹینشن ڈرا کی ہے. پہلی تو بات یہ کہ وی نیڈ ٹو انڈرسٹینڈ یہ رائٹ ٹو لائف اور ہمارے بنیادی حقوق سے بھی پہلے کی بات ہے کہ ہمارے بنیادی رویے کیا ہیں. وی لیو ان اے کنٹری جہاں پر اس چیز کو سمجھا جاتا ہے کہ جب تک کسی شخص کو جیل میں نہ بھیجا جائے آپ کا پرپز اچیو نہیں ہو سکتا, خواہ وہ سول رانگ ہو چاہے وہ کرمنل رانگ ہو. اب انفارچونیٹلی ہمارا جو کرمنل جسٹس سسٹم ہے وہ سارے کا سارا اس پر بیسڈ ہے. آپ دیکھ لیں کسی بھی شخص کا اگر سول دعویٰ بھی ہو تو وہ زیادہ کوشش یہ کرتا ہے کہ میں کسی کے اوپر ایف آئی آر کروا کر اس آدمی کو جیل کے پیچھے بھیجوں تاکہ اس سے میں اپنا جو پرپز ہے وہ ایکسٹریکٹ کروں. اب یہ کس چیز کی طرف آپ کی جو ہے عکاسی کس چیز کی کرتی ہے؟ وہ اس چیز کی کرتی ہے کہ آپ کا سول جسٹس سسٹم شاید اتنا سکسیزفل نہیں ہے, اور کرمنل جسٹس سسٹم میں بھی جو انکارسریشن ہے, جو زور زبردستی ہے, ٹارچر ہے یا اور میتھڈز ہیں جو امپلائی کیے جاتے ہیں, دے آر مور سکسیزفل اور کام آپ کا اینڈ میں ہو جاتا ہے. اب اٹ از ویری انفارچونیٹ کہ جب آپ کسی شخص کو جیل کے پیچھے بھیجتے ہیں جس میں فزیکل ریمانڈ کے بعد جب آپ اس کو جوڈیشل کسٹڈی میں بھیجتے ہیں سینٹنسنگ سے پہلے, اور جیسے بھی کہا معزز مہمان صاحب نے کہ 50% وہ لوگ ہیں جن کا ابھی ٹرائل کمپلیٹ بھی نہیں ہوا. اور میں آپ کو یہ بھی بتا
صاحب تو کہہ رہے ہیں
64%. تو ان میں بھی وہ لوگ ہیں جن کے اوپر میرا خیال ہے کہ اگر آپ تحقیق کریں تو بہت چھوٹے چھوٹے نیچر کے offenses ہیں, لیکن یہ ابھی ثابت نہیں ہوا کہ انہوں نے وہ offense کیا یا نہیں کیا, بٹ آپ ان کو سرٹیفائڈ کرمنلز بنا رہے ہیں بائی پٹنگ them behind bars, اور ان کو انکارسریٹ کر کے آپ ان کی جو ٹینڈنسی ہے وہ کمپلیٹلی ڈرا کر رہے ہیں ایک ڈفرنٹ طرف, جو کہ میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ پھر بعد میں آرٹیکل 9, آرٹیکل 14 اینڈ بیشتر مینی ادر پروویژنز جو ہیں وہ شاید اتنی ریلیونٹ رہتی نہیں اس بات کو ایکسپلین کرنے میں. ہمارے جی معاشرے کی اگر آپ تھوڑی سی تحقیق کریں, آپ تو ٹارچر کے اوپر کافی بات بھی کرتے ہیں اور اس پر آپ نے تحقیق بھی کی ہے کہ بچپن سے ہی ہمارا کوئی بھی چیز ریفرمیٹری طریقے سے کروانے کے ہم حق میں نہیں ہیں. بچے سے بھی کام پیار سے نہیں کروائیں گے, مار کے کروائیں گے. اسکولوں میں بھی مار پڑتی ہے اور ہمیشہ یاد رہتا ہے کہ جی اس طریقے سے ہمارے سے کام کروایا گیا ہے. سو ایوری ایکشن دیٹ از ٹیکن اگینسٹ یو, that action is based on some form of torture, کوئرژن, ڈیوریس, اور آپ کا سارے کا سارا سسٹم وہ آگے وہی ریفلیکٹ کرتا ہے. اب میں وکلا سے آگے جاتا ہوں ججز کے رویے پر. جب آپ بیل پٹیشنز میں پیش ہوتے ہیں, آف لیٹ ابھی ہماری سپریم کورٹ میں جورسپروڈنس بڑی چینج ہو گئی ہے, جسٹس منصور علی شاہ صاحب نے جو بھی آف لیٹ ججمنٹس دی ہیں اس میں بڑی انہوں نے انٹرسٹنگ اور اچھی بات کی, جس سے میں بنیادی طور پہ بڑا اگری بھی کرتا ہوں. جسٹس کھوسا صاحب بھی یہاں پر تشریف رکھتے ہیں, انہوں نے بھی بیشتر ڈیسیجنز دیے ہیں کہ کسی بھی شخص کو ٹرائل کے دوران جیل میں رکھنے کا صرف ایک مقصد ہے, اگر آپ اس کی اٹینڈنس انشور نہیں کر سکتے ٹرائل پر, کہ آپ کو یہ شک ہے کہ یہ کسی کنڈیشن سے ٹیمپر کرے گا یا یہ اس دن ٹرائل پر پیش نہیں ہو سکتا. اس کے علاوہ کسی شخص کو جیل کے پیچھے رکھنا, انلیس ہینیس offences ہیں, میں ٹیررزم اور ان کے علاوہ بات کر رہا ہوں, اس کا کوئی مقصد نہیں ہے.
اچھا
میں صرف ایک جسٹ ون لائن میں اس کو کمپلیٹ کر لوں. سو دا پوائنٹ دیٹ آئی ایم ٹرائنگ ٹو میک ہیئر از کہ فارچونیٹلی اور انفارچونیٹلی ہمارے سبارڈینیٹ کورٹس میں بھی, ہائر کورٹس میں بھی, اور ٹو این ایکسٹینٹ ایک سرٹن پورشن آف دا سپریم کورٹ بھی اس حد چیز میں بلیو کرتی ہے کہ اگر کسی شخص کو جیل سے باہر نکالا گیا تو شاید وہ انصاف کے تقاضے پورے نہ ہو سکیں جو کہ ہونے چاہیے. ویئر ایز اٹس دی ادر وے اراؤنڈ. دس از مائی فرم بلیف. کسی شخص کو جیل کے اندر رکھ کے جو نقصان, جس طرح بھی کھوسا صاحب نے اپنی تقریر میں بہت خوبصورت باتیں کی کہ وی ہیو ٹو بی کمپیشنیٹ ایز ویل, وی ہیو ٹو ورک فار ہز آرٹیکل 14 ایز ویل, کہ اس کے ساتھ جیل میں کیا سلوک ہوتا ہے. اگر آرڈنری کرمنل جیل میں جاتا ہے تو اس کو ریپسٹ کس طرح دیکھتا ہے, ایک مرڈر کا ملزم کس طرح دیکھتا ہے. وہاں پر کیٹیگریز ہیں جیل میں. جیل ان اٹ سیلف ایک کمپلیٹ دنیا ہے, جتنا تگڑا ملزم ہے اتنی تگڑی اس کے ریسورسز ہیں. سو وہ ایک مافیا ہے جس کے اندر آپ اس بندے کو بھیج رہے ہیں. تو کیا اس کو وہاں بھیجنا ضروری ہے بھی کہ نہیں؟ دس از دا موسٹ امپورٹنٹ ڈیسیژن دیٹ دا ججز ہیو ٹو میک while deciding bail applications at the early stage. And of course اگر sentencing ہو جاتی ہے وہ تو پھر بات ڈفرنٹ ہے کہ آپ نے اس کو جیل میں بھیجنا ہے.
اچھا, ابھی جو آپ نے بات کی نا, جہاں پہ میں انٹروین کرنا چاہ رہا تھا, which basically is linking up with what you said, اور اس میں خان صاحب کو بھی, کیونکہ خان صاحب کا ایکسپیرینس ہے ایز اے فارمر پولیس آفیسر. دیکھیے, جو آپ کا کرمنل جسٹس سسٹم ہے اس کے کا جو پہلا زینہ ہے وہ تو پولیس ہے. آپ جو بات کر رہے ہیں نا کہ جہاں پہ ریلیف ممکن بھی ہو وہ بہت اونچے زینے پہ جا کے ملتا ہے, اتنی دیر تک اس کا کباڑا ہو چکا ہوتا ہے اس بندے کا. میں یہ جاننا چاہ رہا ہوں کہ کیا ایسا ممکن ہے کہ جو پہلا زینہ ہے وہاں پہ جو پریکٹیشنرز ہیں, دا پولیس آفیسرز, ان کو یہ معلوم ہونا چاہیے کہ کون سے ایسے اوفینسز ہیں جس کے اوپر آپ نے کسی کو پکڑ کے جیل میں بھجوا دینا. کیونکہ مائی کالیگ از سٹنگ ہیئر, ان فیکٹ آئی لائک ٹو پل یو ان آن دس. ہم جب کل بیٹھ کے اس کے بارے میں بات کر رہے تھے, وہ آپ نے جو ایک ڈیٹا سیٹ بنایا ہے اس میں نے آپ سے پوچھا تھا کہ یہ 18,600 کچھ جو یہ ہیں ادر اوفینسز, یہ کیا ہیں؟ وہ ذرا تھوڑا سا یہاں پہ آڈینس کو بتائیں کہ وہ اس میں کون کون سے اوفینسز تھے.
Yeah, those surprisingly those include kite flying, begging, water theft, sound system act, or smoking shisha. And smoking shisha, surprisingly, whether you smoke it individually, collectively, in your own house, anywhere, that's a non-bailable offense. My data analysis literally raises questions. Usually when we conduct analysis and we compile sets, we usually come up with recommendations. This time it was so surprising, it was so sad. I couldn't come up with recommendations, I could only come up with more questions. Okay, what's going on here? So about that.
Back to you.
آئی تھنک یہ آپ نے ایبسلیوٹلی بڑا امپورٹنٹ سوال پوچھا, اور مزے کی بات یہ کہ سوال کا جواب بھی وی آر لکی کہ کھوسا صاحب کی ہی ایک دو ججمنٹس میں موجود ہے کہ ہمارے ہاں ایک رواج ہے, ایک ٹینڈنسی ہے کہ جب کسی شخص پہ ایف آئی آر کروائی جاتی ہے تو آپ نے اس کو گرفتار ضرور کرنا ہے. دس از ایبسلیوٹلی رانگ. اور میں کھوسا صاحب کی ایک دو ججمنٹ سے پھر اور بیشتر ججمنٹس جس میں بات یہ کی گئی, مقصد یہ کہ وہ ڈسکریشن چھوڑ دی گئی ہے پولیس آفیسر پہ. اب پولیس آفیسر یہ سمجھتا ہے کہ اگر میں نے کسی شخص کو گرفتار نہ کیا, ایک تو اس کا یہ قوی یقین ہے کہ اگر میں نے گرفتار نہ کیا تو میری تفتیش نہیں ہوگی, اور گرفتاری کے بغیر کی گئی تفتیش جو ہے اس کو وہ تفتیش سمجھتے ہی نہیں ہے. سو ان دی اینڈ what happens is they end up arresting almost everybody. اور جب وہ شخص اریسٹ ہوتا ہے, اور جب کوئی پاکستان کا بڑا شخص اریسٹ ہوتا ہے تو پھر پاکستان میں چیزیں سینسٹائز ہوتی ہیں, جس طرح آج کل ٹارچر کی بات ہے اور یہ ساری ہو رہی ہیں. whereas یہ ٹارچر ڈیلی بیسس پر ہوتا ہے, ہر ایک کے ساتھ ہوتا ہے, لیکن اب اس کی بات ہو رہی ہے. تو جب وہ اریسٹ ہو کے اس کو جو جن چیزوں میں سے گزرنا پڑتا ہے ایونچولی ہوتا یہ کہ بائی دا ٹائم ہی ریچز دا پرزن لیٹ سے اگر اس کو سزا ہو جاتی ہے تو جس جرم میں آپ اس کو سزا دے رہے ہیں اس جرم سے بڑا مجرم بن کر وہ جیل کے اندر لینڈ کرتا ہے
ریسیڈیوزم کی جو
ایگزیکٹلی. اور ایونچولی جب وہ باہر آتا ہے یا آئی مین آئی تھنک ایک انڈین بڑی اچھی مووی بنی تھی جو سنجے دت کی لائف ہسٹری پر جو سنجو مووی تھی, پارٹ آف دیٹ مووی واز شاٹ ان دا پرزن اینڈ یو نو وٹ ہیپنز ان دا پرزن. سو اگر آپ اس مووی کو بھی دیکھیں یا سیورل ادرس تو آپ کو پتہ لگتا ہے کہ جیل کی پوری دنیا میں اٹس ناٹ اونلی پاکستانی اسپیسیفک فنومنا. اس کو انفارچونیٹلی ہمارے یہاں تھوڑا بات یہ بھی کی جاتی ہے کہ پاکستان میں بہت برے حالات ہیں. پاکستان میں لاز آؤٹ ڈیٹڈ ہیں, برٹش ٹائم کے لاز ہیں, برٹش ٹائم کے رولز ہیں جن کے اندر اب امپروومنٹ کی جا رہی ہے. آئی ہوپ پنجاب گورنمنٹ پاسز دیٹ ہمارے پنجاب کی حد تک. سملرلی جو آپ کا پرزن ایکٹ ہے اس کے اندر ابھی تک کمپلینٹ ریڈریسل میکنزم ہی کوئی نہیں ہے. یعنی کہ پرزنر کو آپ یہ سمجھتے ہیں کہ اس کو کوئی کسی قسم کی شکایت ہو ہی نہیں سکتی. ساری آپ کی لاز رولز ڈیل کرتے ہیں ود دی ایڈمنسٹریٹو میٹرز. کپڑے دے دیں, ٹائم پر پانی دے دیں, یہ دے دیں. دیز آر ناٹ ہز ریئل ایشوز. ہز ریئل ایشوز آر ٹارچر, ڈگنیٹی, رائٹ ٹو لائف, جو کہ میرا نہیں خیال ابھی ایگزسٹنگ لاز میں اس کو کسی طرح گارنٹی کیے جائیں یا اس کے بارے میں وہ بات بھی کرے یا ایونچولی جو کہ عدالت میں آئیں.
خان صاحب مطلب نان بیلیبل آفینسز ایسے شیشہ پینے پہ, پتنگ بازی پہ, یہ مطلب دس از وہ فرینکلی کوائٹ
ریڈیکولس ہے. بات سمپل سی یہ ہے کہ ہمارے ہاں قانون کے متعلق سب کوئی آدھا تیتر آدھا بٹیر والا کنسیپٹ ہے. قانون کبھی بھی یہ نہیں کہتا کہ ایوری تھنگ شوڈ بی پنش ود دی انکارسریشن. فائنز بھی لیے جا سکتے ہیں. دوسرا میں جو پولیس کی چیکنگ, اسنیپ چیکنگ اور دوسری چیکنگ انفارچونیٹلی یہ ایک جس کو کہنا ہے نی جرک ریئیکشن پولیس نے ڈیولپ کر لیا ہے. وہ ڈیولپ کرنے کی وجہ بھی ہماری سوسائٹل پریشر اور ہمارے کلچر کا ایک بہت بڑا اثر ہے کہ بات کا بتنگڑ بنایا جاتا ہے. وہ اکثر آپ نے اخباری خبروں میں دیکھا ہوگا کہ جی سر عام سر بازار وہ ایک عورت کو چھیڑ رہے تھے اور قریبی دو پولیس والے موٹر سائیکل پہ کھڑے ہوئے تھے لیکن بچانے کے لیے کوئی نہیں آیا. تو کدھر تھے محافظ؟ تو اب وہ جو بعض دفعہ جب ریئیکٹ نہ کریں, جب وہ اس کو قانون کو بالکل ہی قانون کے مطابق چلنے کی کوشش کریں کہ ان کو تنبیہ کرنے کی کوشش کریں اور چھوڑنے کی کوشش کریں, تو تب بھی پولیس والے کے اوپر نیگیٹیوٹی جاتی ہے. اور جب وہ پرو ایکٹیو ہوں اور وہ ہر ایک کو جو ہے نا روک روک کے چیک کرنے لگیں, اسنیپ چیکنگ کرنے لگیں, تو لا محالہ ویسے یہ بھی قانون کوئی نہیں کہتا کہ راہ چلتے ہوئے آپ ہر ایک سے اس کا ڈرائیونگ لائسنس پوچھنا شروع کر دیں اور اس کو روک کے پوچھ لیں کہ کہاں جا رہا ہے کہاں نہیں جا رہا. لیکن if the society tolerates it and thus rule makers and the policy makers in the society have no qualms about changing that attitude of the police, rather they feel very happy and very comfy with this sort of thing, not in a particular place but all over Pakistan. تو پھر آپ there is no incentive for police to change.
Correct. Well, it's been indicated to me that our time is up. Is it absolutely up, or can I just have a concluding remark from Radha Shah?
میں صرف اجازت لوں گا. Actually, I just have to get into a meeting if I am permitted to leave.
Okay. Okay. Let me just get a concluding remark from Radha Shah. So, Dr. Shah, you heard this discussion also, and I mean, you've done a lot of research on your book. Do you believe that there is the kind of will required for these reforms to actually happen? Or do you think they could partially happen? What is your sense after your research?
I mean, of course, there needs to be a will to make reforms. But it's about more than reforms. The idea of prison reform itself is colonial in origin. There has always been a blurring of boundaries between correction, rehabilitation, and punishment. And when you look at that history, it's possible to see that much of this goes back entirely to the notion of punishment. and that through punishment, rehabilitation can be achieved. There needs to be a change in thinking to begin with around these ideas, and I think the panelists covered this. Certainly, the rules themselves need to be reimagined, they need to be rewritten. These are very old docs. They come from the late 1800s. They have seen very little change in post-colonial history. That change, the little change that they have seen has been their tweaks here and there. They are also changes that remove the most base forms of punishment. So corporal punishment is removed. But the way that these documents are structured for the continued management of prison design, its day-to-day, prisoner bodies, much of this remains the same. And if that's not going to change, if we're not going to abandon this idea that prison is a space only to manage bodies,
That's right.
if we don't abandon that, and if we don't think about the ways in which human rights are the most important aspect of people's lives, then nothing's going to change.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Radha. Thank you for researching and writing this book. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm really grateful also to JPP for this. That brings an end to our panel discussion. Let's start with whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ijaz, and all the panelists for that insightful discussion. For our closing remarks, I would like to invite upon stage Justice Qasim Khan.
Recording stopped.
Justice Qasim Khan has served as the Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court from March 2020 to July 2021. His Lordship joined the legal profession after receiving his education from Bahauddin Zakaria University and University Gilani Law College. From 2000 to 2009, His Lordship served as the Assistant Advocate General Multan and represented the government in a number of cases and rendered significant legal opinions to the state in the formulation of its policies and execution of its decisions. His influential presence in the legal fraternity was accredited in the form of his elevation to the bench of the Lahore High Court in 2010. In his career as a High Court judge, His Lordship rendered several landmark judgments and successfully handled various administrative assignments. So without further ado, my Lord, if you could.
Thank you, gentlemen. I was caught by the Miss Sarah just about 12 noon by one of my friend that you have to join this function. And after hearing by the concerned friend that Justice Khusa, former Chief Justice Pakistan, is also a keynote speaker, it was a great occasion for me to hear him here, and especially with respect to the prisoners. और उन्होंने और ड्यूरिंग डिस्कशन यहाँ जो दोस्तों ने कहा, मुझे गालिब का एक शेर याद आ गया, देखना तकरीर की लज्जत जो उसने कहा, मैंने ये जाना गोया ये भी मेरे दिल में है। बड़े मुख्तसर वक्त में उन्होंने बहुत से अहम पहलू अपनी स्पीच में समोदिए जो सोचने और करने के लिए हमारे लिए बहुत से रास्ते खोलते हैं। ये किताब, दिस इज एन इम्पोर्टेंट एफर्ट which will open the ways for reframing of the rules, laws, and now the time has to come that the parliamentarians, concerned authorities who have to play their part must go ahead, and we should left the rules and policies which were framed and adopted in colonial era. I will not took much time, just some sentences. जब मैंने वकालत शुरू की तो पुलिस वाले अपनी पहली या दूसरी केस डायरी के आखिर में, जब वो 161 के तहत बयानात लिख लेते थे, तो एक जुमला लिखते थे, मुल्ज़मान के खिलाफ सबूत काबिल गिरफ्तारी गुजर चुका है, अब मैं रवाना बराए गिरफ्तारी मुल्ज़मान होता हूँ। And later on, at the end of 1990, 2000, number of police files which I examined, this sentence was missing. ये वो अहम काम जिस वक्त पुलिस ने गिरफ्तारी से पहले लिखना है, अपना माइंड अप्लाई करना है कि मेरे पास वाकई सबूत मौजूद है मुल्ज़म को गिरफ्तार करने का, वो उस सेंटेंस को छोड़ गया। फिर second important time for the accused who is produced before the magistrate. It's the duty of the magistrate, firstly, to examine in the light of evidence collected by the investigation officer which offenses are made out. Secondly, if the offenses are bailable, he is bound under section 496 to grant bail to the accused, and he should write down the order के इतने जमानती मचलका जात जमा कराए तो इसको रहा किया जाए. Thirdly, he has to examine whether the person under handcuff has been produced before him. He is a minor or not, prima facie. At that time, his observation is whether prima facie he is a minor or not. Or he will be dealt by the ordinary law or special law. And if he is a woman, he has to examine what privileges has been provided to the woman under the law of the land. By considering all these things, he has to pass an order, especially to protect the rights of the accused has been produced before him. फिर सोसाइटी में एक कल्चर बन गया है कि हमने एफआईआर दर्ज करा के मुल्ज़म को गिरफ्तार कराना है. Even if the accused is on physical remand or judicial remand, he is with the police officer, investigation branch, or he is in the jail, वो अंडर द सुपरविजन ऑफ मजिस्ट्रेट है, वो उसका कस्टोडियन है उसके तमाम राइट्स का, वो उसके हुक्म के तहत वहाँ है. और इसी वजह से है कि कभी रिमांड मुल्ज़म की गैर मौजूदगी में नहीं देना, हाँ फिजिकल रिमांड है और जुडिशल रिमांड है, اس کی وجہ یہ ہے کہ ملزم اس وقت عدالت کو کوئی بات جس کو وہ ضروری سمجھتا ہے، کوئی ایسی انجری جو اس کو کاز کی جا رہی ہے، وہ اس کو بتا سکے. اور پھر اگر مجسٹریٹ کسی بھی سٹیج پر یہ سمجھے کہ ملزم کو اس جیل میں پراپر ٹریٹ نہیں کیا جا سکتا، he can order for transfer him from one jail to another jail. لیکن اس سب کے لیے اجتماعی طور پہ ہر بندے کی تربیت کی ضرورت ہے اور اس کو اس احساس دلانے کی ضرورت ہے کہ ڈگنیٹی آف مین جو ہے یہ بہت امپورٹنٹ چیز ہے. پھر ایک اور بہت بڑا پرابلم ہے، کیونکہ میں نے تو ٹرائل کا کام مجسٹریٹ سے شروع کیا تھا اور پھر لارڈشپ کھوسا صاحب 2.5 سال تقریباً ملتان میں رہے اور میں ان کی کورٹ میں آفیسر تھا تو بہت سیکھا ان سے. اور بلکہ خوبی یہ تھی لارڈشپ کی کہ کبھی یہ کوئی ایشو ذمہ لگا دیتے تھے کہ اس پہ ذرا ریسرچ کر کے آئیں، تو میں بڑی محنت کر کے جب ریسرچ کر کے آتا تھا تو تجربے کے مطابق پھر میں سوچتا تھا کہ اب اتنی کی ریسرچ کی ہے کہ اب جج صاحب کے پاس اتنا میٹیریل نہیں ہوگا. لیکن جج صاحب خود بھی ریسرچ کرتے تھے، یہ مجھ سے زیادہ نکال کے چیزیں لے آتے تھے، اور جب میں اپنا کیس پلیٹ کرتا تھا تو یہ آخر میں کہتے تھے یہ چیزیں بھی ذرا دیکھ لیں. تو ایک بہت بڑا پرابلم یہ ہے کہ ڈیفنس کونسل جو ہے وہ ٹرائل کورٹ صرف کیپٹل اوفنس کے کیسز میں جو ہے نا اپوائنٹ کر سکتی ہے. باقی جتنے کیسز ہیں اس میں کورٹ ڈیفنس کونسل اپوائنٹ نہیں کر سکتی. اور بہت سارے لوگ یہ ہوتے ہیں وہ بار بار مجسٹریٹ کے پاس پیش ہو رہے ہیں، چالان موجود ہے، وہ کہتے ہیں جی میری اس دفعہ ملاقات آئے گی تو میں اپنے گھر والوں کو کہوں گا کہ جی وکیل رکھ دیں. نیکسٹ ڈیٹ پہ وہ کہتے ہیں جی اس دفعہ ملاقات نہیں آ سکی، اگلی دفعہ ہے. مطلب یہ ہے کہ بہت سے کیسز میں تاخیر اس وجہ سے ہوتی ہے کہ وہ ملزمان جو ہیں ان کی پیچھے جو فیملی ہے وہ وکیل جو ہے وہ انگیج نہیں کر سکتے اور وہ تاخیر کا شکار ہوتا ہے. پھر جہاں اصلاح کی بات ہوئی اور سزا کی بات ہوئی، ہمارا جو لا ہے وہ پاکستان پینل کوڈ ہے، اور جس وقت اوفینس پروو ہوتا ہے تو سزا سے پہلے جو جملہ لکھتی ہے کورٹ، such and such offense has been proved against the accused, نام he is convicted and sentenced. جو اور لا کا نام بھی پاکستان پینل کوڈ ہے. میرے خیال میں ہمیں اس میں بہت ریفارمز کی ضرورت ہے. ایک سینٹینسنگ پالیسی ہونی چاہیے اور بہت سارے معاملات میں پیرول اور پروبوشن کے اوپر جو ہے وہ ملزمان کو چھوڑ دینا چاہیے اور ان سے سوشل ورک لینا چاہیے اور ان کو آبزرو کرتے رہنا چاہیے کہ یہ لوگ جو ہیں یہ سوسائٹی کے لیے کارآمد سٹیزن بن سکیں. کچھ چیزیں لا میں موجود ہیں. پریزن ڈپارٹمنٹ سے بھی کچھ لوگ تھے. تھاؤزنڈز آف پریزنرز جو جیل میں ہیں وہ نارکوٹکس کے تحت ہیں اور ان میں بھی اکثریت جو ہے ان لوگوں کی ہے جو ایڈکشن کا شکار ہیں لیکن ان کی ٹریٹمنٹ نہیں ہے. ان کی ری ہیبلیٹیشن کے لیے جو ہے وہ لا کہتا ہے کہ گورنمنٹ نے کام کرنا ہے لیکن ریہیبلیٹیشن کے لیے کبھی کوئی کام نہیں ہوا. اور اگر وہ سارے لوگ جیل سے نکل آئیں تو ایک سفیشینٹ نمبر آف ایکیوز جو ہیں وہ جیل سے باہر آ جائیں گے اور جو برڈن ہے کورٹس کے اوپر وہ کم ہو جائے گا. جہاں جیل میں خواتین کی بات اور مائنرز کی بات ہے اس میں تو پریکٹیکلی بہت کام کرنے والا ہے. میں اس چیز کو سفیشینٹ نہیں سمجھتا کہ ایک بڑی جیل کے ایک طرف دیوار دے کے ایک بیرک خواتین کی بنا دی جائے اور پھر ایک بیرک جو ہے بچوں کی بنا دی جائے. ان کی باضابطہ انڈیپینڈنٹ جیلز ہونی چاہیے اور دونوں جیلوں کی علیحدہ علیحدہ ریکوائرمنٹس ہیں. اور اس پہ ابھی ہمارے پارلیمنٹیرینز نے کرنے کے لیے کوئی ایفرٹ نہیں کی. پھر بہت سارے چھوٹے پیٹی اوفینسز ایسے ہوتے ہیں کہ جیسے ہی وہ اندر جاتے ہیں جیل میں پولیس والے بھی کہتے ہیں اور جیل اتھارٹیز بھی کہتی ہیں ابھی اتنا عرصہ تم پیشیاں بھگت لو وکیل نہ کرنا اتنے مہینے کے بعد جج صاحب کے پاس کنفیس کر لینا تمہیں انڈر گان کر کے چھوڑ دیں گے. اور وہ ایکیوز جو ہیں وہ ویٹ کرتے رہتے ہیں. کبھی ان کے عزیز و اقارب رشتہ دار رابطہ کریں وہ کہتے ہیں وکیل نہیں کرنا. نارکوٹکس کے ایڈکٹس جو ہے بہت سارے وہ اس طرح کرتے ہیں. تو اس کی طرف بھی جو ہے نا کچھ لیجسلیشن کی ضرورت ہے اور جب تک ان کی ریہیبلیٹیشن ایسے ملزمان کی نہیں ہوگی اور ان کو پراپر گائیڈ نہیں کیا جائے گا اس وقت تک وہ اپنے رائٹس کو پروٹیکٹ نہیں کر سکیں گے. میں آخر میں پھر میڈم سارہ بلال کا آئی نو ہر کپل آف ایئرز بیفور اور یہ پریزنرز کے لیے بہت کام کر رہی ہیں. آپ سب لوگوں کا اور میرے انتہائی قابل احترام فارمر چیف جسٹس پاکستان جناب جسٹس کھوسا صاحب کا ممنون ہوں. I have learnt a lot from him and other persons who participated in this function. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, my lord, for that speech. With that, we come to the conclusion of our event today. Thank you, everyone, for taking out time to be present here at the book launch. And we now have tea and refreshments in the back. Thank you, everyone.